My husband threw medical papers at my chest the night I told 50 guests I was pregnant. He told the room he had a vasectomy 5 years ago. The baby I had spent 3 years trying to conceive could not possibly be his. Not one guest spoke. His mother twisted my wedding ring off my finger. I did not cry. I smoothed my dress and walked out the front door. He thought he had destroyed me. He had no idea what he started. That is the version I can tell in one breath. But one breath does not hold the weight of what happened in that room, so let me slow it down. It was a Saturday evening in October at our house in Lake Forest, Illinois, the house with the garden I had designed myself down to the last hydrangea. 50 guests in our dining room. A string quartet Richard had hired playing something by Vivaldi. Champagne flutes lined up on the sideboard. I had chosen the menu and pressed my dress and spent the afternoon arranging orchids on the centerpieces because I wanted everything to be perfect for our 7th anniversary. The anniversary where I would finally share the news I had been carrying for 12 weeks like a secret made of glass. I stood at the head of the table and tapped a fork against a crystal glass. It made a small, bright, almost musical note that floated across the room. I had practiced that tap 3 times in the bathroom mirror before coming downstairs. Then I said the words I had waited 1,000 days to say. I told them I was pregnant. My voice broke on the word because after 3 years of hormone injections, 3 failed cycles, and 214 needles pushed into my abdomen, the word pregnant still felt like something I might shatter if I held it too tightly. I expected the room to erupt. I expected Richard to cross the floor and take me in his arms. He walked toward me with a stack of papers, and the look on his face was something I had never seen in 7 years, a cold, theatrical fury, the fury of a man who had rehearsed this moment. The pages hit my chest and scattered across the white tablecloth, and I stumbled backward into the edge of the buffet, catching myself with one hand on the corner while the other went straight to my stomach. He stood over me, and his voice filled the room like something cracking apart. He said I was a liar. He said I was unfaithful. He held up one sheet, a medical form, with a clinic logo at the top and announced that he had undergone a vasectomy 5 years ago and the child I carried could not possibly be his. He called my baby a word that made 2 women near the window cover their mouths. Eleanor. His mother rose from her chair, crossed the room in 4 steps, and twisted the family heirloom ring off my finger. She looked at my stomach and said, "You have no place in this family." The string quartet stopped mid-measure. Someone near the bar coughed. I stood there with documents scattered at my feet and a bruise forming on my hip, and I understood that every single person in that room believed him. I picked up my clutch from the chair where I had left it. Someone had already draped a jacket over my seat, as if I had been erased from the evening. I walked through the foyer, past the garden I had spent 4 seasons planting, and out the front door. Behind me, I heard Richard telling someone to cancel all joint credit cards immediately. The October air hit my face, and it smelled like burning leaves and the jasmine I had trained along the trellis by the driveway. I got into my car. I sat there for a while with my hands on the wheel and my eyes dry and my baby the size of a lime floating in the dark inside me. Before we continue, if you believe that no woman should ever be silenced for telling the truth, please consider subscribing. It is free, and it helps stories like mine reach the people who need to hear them. To understand what happened in that dining room, you need to know the woman who stood there. You need to know what I built, what I gave up, and what I did not yet know I was capable of. I met Richard 8 years before that night at a fundraiser for the Chicago Botanical Garden. I was 34, a landscape architect with a growing reputation for designing private estates that looked like they had existed for 100 years. He was 37, a portfolio manager at a mid-size investment fund, the kind of man who wore his ambition like cologne. He asked me about the difference between English and Japanese garden design and actually listened to the answer. That was enough. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony at the Art Institute, and within 2, we had purchased the house in Lake Forest, where I would eventually be thrown out like a stranger. Those early years had a warmth to them that I can still feel when I close my eyes, even now, even knowing what I know. Richard brought me coffee every morning, 2 sugars, a little cream, and he would sit on the edge of the bed and watch me drink it like he had nowhere else to be. I did not know then that I preferred chamomile tea. I did not know because I never had the space to find out. I designed our garden from scratch, 3 seasons of planting and amending soil and choosing every stone in the walkway. I built the place where Richard would later host parties for his investors without mentioning that his wife had created every inch of the landscape they admired through the floor-to-ceiling windows. When we started trying for a baby, I was 37. By the time we entered the IVF clinic, I was 39. 3 years of treatment, 214 injections into my abdomen and thighs, each one leaving a small bruise that overlapped with the last until my skin looked like a watercolor painting in shades of purple and yellow. I gave up my chance at a partnership at the firm because the hormone cycles made it impossible to travel to client sites. I told my boss I needed to step back. I told Richard I was happy to do it. He held my hand during the blood draws and said, "Whether we have a baby or not, you are all I need." I believed him the way you believe the ground beneath your feet will hold. I did not count the cost because I did not think anyone was keeping a ledger. I handed him control of our finances so I could focus on the treatments, joint accounts, investment portfolios, the mortgage, the insurance, everything. He said it made sense for one person to manage it all. He said I had enough to worry about. His mother, Eleanor, came to dinner once a month and made comments about my cooking that she disguised as compliments. She would look at the wine Richard poured and say, "You always had such refined taste, Richard. It must be hard for Diane to keep up." I smiled every time. I cleared the plates every time. Eleanor never missed an opportunity to remind me of my position. At a Christmas dinner during our 4th year of marriage, she pulled Richard aside in the kitchen. She thought I could not hear, but the house had thin walls, and I was standing on the other side arranging dessert plates. She said, "You could have married Catherine Whitfield. She has family money, and she would not have needed all this fertility nonsense." Richard said nothing. He did not defend me. He came back to the table and poured more wine, and when I looked at him, he smiled as if nothing had happened. I told myself that was just how Eleanor was. I told myself he loved me too much to let her words matter. The IVF consumed everything. 3 full cycles over 3 years. Each cycle meant weeks of daily hormone injections, blood draws every 48 hours, ultrasounds, egg retrievals, under sedation transfers, and then the 2-week wait that felt like 2 years. The first cycle failed at implantation. The second resulted in a chemical pregnancy that ended at 5 weeks, a loss so early that some people do not even call it a miscarriage. But I felt it. I felt every cell of it leave my body. The third cycle, the one that finally held, the one that grew into the 12-week miracle I announced at that party, came after I had almost given up. During those years, Richard gradually took over all financial management. It started as a kindness. "You have enough to worry about, let me handle the accounts." Then it became a system. He moved our banking to a single platform under his email address. He added himself as the primary on every credit card. He consolidated the investment portfolio into accounts that required his signature for withdrawals. Each step seemed logical. Each step was a wall being built around money I had helped earn. I did not see the walls because they were presented as shelter. I counted 214 injections. I know the exact number because I kept a journal during the treatments, a small notebook, with a check mark for every needle. I was lying in the clinic one afternoon, bruised and nauseous from the progesterone, staring at the ceiling tiles, and I did not know that at that exact moment, my husband was using our joint credit card to book a suite at the Peninsula Hotel for a woman named Victoria. I would not learn that for months, but the math sits inside me now like a stone. 214 needles in my body, and a hotel suite charged to our account. On the same Tuesday, I was told the third cycle had failed, and I sobbed in the parking garage alone because Richard said he had a meeting he could not reschedule. There were things I chose not to see. I am telling you this not because I was foolish, but because I need you to understand how trust works after 7 years. Trust is not a feeling, it is architecture. You build it brick by brick over thousands of days until it becomes the structure you live inside, and then you cannot see the cracks because the cracks would mean the whole building is unsound, and if the building is unsound, then where do you live? That is why I ignored the first signs. Not because I was blind, because seeing would have cost me everything. It started 5 or 6 months before the party. Richard changed the password on his phone. He had never had a password before, or rather, he had one, and I knew it because we shared everything, or I thought we did. When I asked, he said the firm required new security protocols. I said that made sense. A few weeks later, I noticed cash withdrawals from our joint account. $2,000 here, $3,000 there, always in round numbers, always from ATMs I did not recognize. I asked about them at dinner, and his fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and he said it was for client entertainment, off the books, nothing to worry about. His voice had an edge to it, a small, sharp edge that I had not heard before. Then the shirt. I was sorting laundry on a Wednesday afternoon, and I picked up his blue Oxford, the one I always ironed carefully along the collar, because his skin was sensitive there, and I smelled it. It was not his cologne. It was something floral and expensive, the kind of perfume that comes in a glass bottle with a French name. There was a faint smudge near the second button, a color that did not belong to any lipstick I owned. I stood in the laundry room holding that shirt for what felt like a very long time. The washer hummed beside me, waiting. My hands knew what they were holding. My brain refused to translate. I told myself it could be anything. A colleague's perfume in a crowded elevator. A client who stood too close. I told myself that 3 years of hormone injections had made my senses unreliable, that the progesterone was turning me into someone paranoid. I opened the washer lid, pushed the shirt inside, and pressed the start button. The drum began to spin, and I watched through the round glass window as the water rose and the evidence disappeared. That was the first time I chose not to see. It would not be the last. 2 weeks later, I asked Richard to sign the enrollment forms for an expanded maternity insurance plan. My OB had recommended it once the pregnancy was confirmed. Richard picked up the paperwork, glanced at the premium, and set it back down. "Let us wait," he said. "The pregnancy is still early. Let things stabilize first." He used the word stabilize the way a banker uses the word restructuring, with calm authority that discourages follow-up questions. I noticed the deflection. I told myself he was being practical. I told myself that financial caution was not the same as indifference. But something in the back of my mind had started keeping a list I did not want to read. I told my sister Helen during one of our Sunday phone calls. Helen is an emergency room charge nurse at Northwestern Memorial. She has spent 20 years reading situations in seconds, and she does not believe in coincidences. She was quiet for a long time after I told her about the cash withdrawals and the shirt. Then she said, "Diane, people who take cash in round numbers are hiding purchases. People who change passwords are hiding conversations." I told her she was being dramatic. She said, "I am being an ER nurse. I read symptoms." I laughed it off. I told myself Helen was projecting that she had seen too many tragedies and now she saw them everywhere. But the signs kept coming. Richard refused to sign the paperwork for an expanded maternity insurance plan, saying we should wait until the pregnancy was further along, until things were stable. He said the word stable the way you would say maybe, and I noticed, but I did not press. There were new clothes in his closet, that I had not seen him buy a cologne that was not the one I had given him for Christmas, a gym membership at a club across town when there was a perfectly good gym 2 blocks from his office. Small changes. The kind of changes a woman notices and a man does not think to hide because he does not believe his wife pays attention to the details. But I am a landscape architect. Details are my entire profession. I notice when a grade changes by half an inch. I notice when a drainage pattern shifts. I noticed everything. I just chose not to add it up. His Apple Watch buzzed one evening while he was in the shower, and I glanced at it on the nightstand and saw a notification from a hotel, a confirmation for a reservation at the Peninsula Chicago, a room I knew nothing about. The preview showed a check-in date that was 2 days away. When he came out of the bathroom, I mentioned it casually, and he said it was a booking for an out-of-town investor, a courtesy, nothing personal. He said it with his back to me while he toweled his hair, and I could not see his face. I told myself that was reasonable. I told myself that investment managers do book hotels for clients. I told myself a lot of things during those months. Each time, the explanation I invented was thinner than the last. Each time, the energy it took to believe it was greater. I was running out of reasons the way you run out of air, underwater slowly, and then all at once. But then the party happened. And after the party, there was nothing left to explain away. The night Richard threw me out of our house, the temperature in Chicago was 38 degrees. I stood on the front porch in the dress I'd chosen for our anniversary, a deep green silk that I'd bought on sale 3 months earlier, because full price was something Richard would have questioned. I had no coat. My phone had 11% battery. I called Helen and said 3 words, "Come get me." She did not ask a single question. 20 minutes later, her car pulled into the driveway and I got in and she drove us to her apartment on the north side without speaking. That night on Helen's sofa, I came apart. Not loudly, not with screaming or throwing things. I lay on my side with a borrowed blanket pulled up to my chin and I shook. My body could not stop shaking. Every few minutes, a new piece of the evening would surface a detail I had been too shocked to process in real time, and the shaking would get worse. Richard's face when he said the word. Eleanor's fingers twisting the ring. The sound of the string quartet stopping. The way 50 people looked at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. The wife of Richard's business partner had been standing near the window, holding a glass of champagne, and when the documents scattered across the table, she turned away, not in horror, but in embarrassment. The way you turn away from something shameful, and I understood that she was embarrassed for me, not for him. That detail hurt more than the others somehow. And underneath all of it, beneath the humiliation and the cold and the shaking, my baby, 12 weeks old, the size of a lime, floating in the wreckage of everything I had believed was real. I put my hand on my stomach, and I held it there all night as if my palm could be a shield, as if I could protect this tiny life from the rubble falling around us. Helen brought me water at 3 a.m. She sat on the floor next to the sofa and did not speak. She just sat there. That is the kind of thing you learn in an emergency room, that sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is simply be present in the same room as someone who is falling apart. I drank the water. I looked at the ceiling. I said, "He planned it, Helen. He planned the whole thing." She nodded. She already knew. The next morning, a courier delivered an envelope to Helen's apartment. I do not know how Richard knew I was there. Inside was a petition for divorce, filed on grounds of adultery, along with a proposed settlement that offered me nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not a cent of the investment portfolio we had built together. The document stated that I had committed marital infidelity, resulting in pregnancy by another man, and that Richard was entitled to the entirety of the marital estate as compensation for emotional damages. The filing date was the Monday before the party. Helen saw me staring at it, and she sat down across from me at her kitchen table and said something that changed everything. "He filed on Monday. The party was Saturday. That means the paperwork was prepared days in advance, maybe weeks. Diane, this was not a man reacting to a betrayal. This was a man executing a plan." She leaned forward. "And another thing. No man undergoes a vasectomy and hides it from his wife for 5 years while she is going through IVF. That piece of paper is a lie." I sat with the divorce petition in my hands, and I looked at the filing date, and I looked at the date of the party, and I measured the distance between them the way I measure distances on a site plan, with precision, without emotion. Helen was right. He had filed 48 hours before I made my announcement. The lawyers had drafted documents. The financial freeze was coordinated. The performance at the party was not rage. It was theater. This was not a husband discovering a betrayal. This was an ambush designed to leave me with nothing. Something shifted inside me then. Not a dramatic transformation, more like a circuit breaker flipping from one position to another. I stopped shaking. I put the petition down on the glass table, very carefully, very gently, and the surface was cold under my fingertips. I looked at Helen and I said, "I need to prove that baby is his?" Helen nodded. She was already thinking the same thing. As a nurse, she knew the procedures. "Amniocentesis," she said. "They can extract fetal cells and run a paternity test at 12 weeks. There is a small risk, less than 1%, but it will give you a definitive answer." I did not hesitate. I called my OB the next morning and scheduled the procedure for that Thursday. If Richard was the father, then every word he had spoken at that party was a lie. And if every word was a lie, then the vasectomy document was forged. And if the document was forged, then there was a reason he needed me gone, a reason that had nothing to do with my fidelity and everything to do with his. The results came back 9 days later. Helen and I sat at her kitchen table, the same table where I had read the divorce petition, and I opened the envelope from the genetics lab. Paternity probability, 99.99%. Richard was the father. He had always been the father. The vasectomy was a fiction. The medical document he had waved in front of 50 people was a fabrication. My baby was his, and he had thrown us both away like garbage based on a lie he had manufactured himself. I could have gone public that day. I could have posted the results online, called every guest at the party shown up at Richard's office with the lab report. But I did not. I called Sarah instead. Sarah Chen was a family law attorney in downtown Chicago whom Helen had found through a colleague. Sarah specialized in cases where one spouse had hidden or dissipated marital assets, and she had a reputation for being surgically precise in the courtroom. During our first meeting, she spread the DNA results on her desk, read them twice, then looked at me over her glasses and said something I have never forgotten. Under the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act, Section 503, the dissipation of marital assets during a period when the marriage is undergoing an irretrievable breakdown is grounds for an unequal distribution of property in your favor. But that is the civil side. What your husband did with that forged medical document that is potentially a federal crime. If we can prove the vasectomy record was fabricated, we are not just talking about a divorce settlement. We are talking about criminal fraud. She paused. But we have to be smart. If you confront him now, he will claim a clerical error at the clinic or blame a third party. We need to establish the full scope of his deception before we move. So we built a case. I did what I do professionally. I mapped the terrain. In my work as a landscape architect, every project begins with a site survey measuring the land, identifying the grade changes, finding where the water flows and where it pools. I applied the same discipline to my own life. I pulled every financial record I could access, cross-referenced dates and transactions, and constructed a timeline of expenditures that did not match any legitimate purpose. Helen and I hired a private investigator named Tom Kessler, a former forensic accountant who had transitioned into private work. Within 2 weeks, Tom delivered his preliminary findings, and the picture that emerged was worse than anything I had imagined. Richard had never had a vasectomy. The document he presented at the party was traced to a clinic owned by a college friend of his named Dr. Marcus Hale. The clinic existed, but the procedure had never been performed. The medical record was created digitally complete with a forged signature and a fabricated date. Tom's digital forensic specialist determined that the PDF had been generated just 3 days before our anniversary party. 3 days. While I was arranging flowers and tasting menu options and practicing my announcement in the mirror, Richard was in his office, manufacturing the weapon he would use to destroy me. But the vasectomy fraud was only the surface. Underneath it, Tom found the real architecture of betrayal. Richard had been seeing a woman named Victoria Ashford for 14 months. Victoria was the only daughter of Gerald Ashford, who owned a chain of luxury hotels across the eastern seaboard. She was 30. She was wealthy beyond anything Richard could achieve on his own, and she represented exactly the kind of upward trajectory that a man like Richard, a man who measured his worth in net worth, would sacrifice anything to reach, including a wife, including an unborn child. Tom's report included credit card statements showing Richard had purchased a Cartier bracelet worth $14,000 and a pair of diamond earrings worth $8,500 using a secondary card I had never known existed. He had signed a 6-month lease on a furnished condominium 3 blocks from Victoria's downtown apartment, paying $3,200 per month from an account he had opened in his name alone. The total documented dissipation of marital assets came to $87,000 over 14 months. Richard's plan was precise. By framing me as an adulterer who had gotten pregnant by another man, He could file for divorce on fault grounds and argue that I was entitled to nothing. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not community property, which meant a judge had discretion over how assets were divided. With an adultery finding on record, Richard's lawyers could push for a settlement that left me virtually empty-handed. He would walk away with the house, the portfolio, the savings, and a clean path to marrying into the Ashford fortune. It was not a crime of passion. It was a business plan with my life as the cost of doing business. During those weeks of investigation, I had to perform the most difficult role of my life. Richard called and texted constantly, alternating between threats and condescension. He demanded I sign the settlement agreement. He told me no lawyer would take my case because the evidence of my infidelity was overwhelming. He said I should be grateful he was not seeking damages. One text read, "You brought this on yourself, Diane. Sign the papers and disappear with whatever dignity you have left." Another sent at midnight said, "Victoria is twice the woman you ever were." I read that one sitting on Helen's bathroom floor because I did not want her to see my face. Not because I was hurt by the comparison, because I was so angry I could feel it in my teeth, a grinding metallic fury that I had to swallow and bury and replace with meekness. Every message was designed to make me feel small, to make me surrender. And I let him believe it was working. I responded to his texts with short, defeated messages. "I just need more time. Please, Richard, can we talk? I do not want to fight." Each word tasted like rust in my mouth. But Sarah had been clear. Let him feel confident. Overconfident people make mistakes, and they commit perjury. Every arrogant text he sends you is another brick in the wall we are building around him. So I played the part of the broken wife, while behind the scenes I was assembling the evidence that would end him. There were nights when the gap between who I was pretending to be and who I actually was felt so wide I thought I would fall into it. I would sit in Helen's kitchen after sending another groveling text, and I would press my palms flat against the table until my fingers turned white just to feel something solid, something that was not a performance. One afternoon, Richard showed up unannounced at the lobby of Helen's building. He wanted me to sign papers. I heard his voice through the intercom, and my heart slammed against my ribs because Tom's investigation report was sitting on the coffee table near the window, a manila folder thick with photographs and financial records visible from the front door. I buzzed him up because refusing would have seemed suspicious. In the 90 seconds it took for the elevator to reach the 4th floor, I crossed the apartment, picked up the folder, opened the kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator, and slid it behind a row of cereal boxes. When the door opened, Richard stood there in his gray overcoat, looking pleased with himself, holding a pen and a single document. I lowered my eyes. I made my voice soft. I told him I was still reviewing the papers with my lawyer, and I promised to have an answer by the end of the week. He looked around the small apartment, Helen's modest furniture, the borrowed blanket folded on the sofa, and I saw the satisfaction in his eyes. He believed I was defeated. He believed the apartment and the blanket and my quiet voice were proof that his plan had worked. He left without noticing that his entire destruction was hidden 6 feet away behind a box of Cheerios. The night before the mediation hearing, I sat alone in Helen's apartment with the evidence spread across her glass coffee table. Helen was working a night shift. The apartment was silent except for the refrigerator humming and the occasional car passing on the street below. On my left was the DNA paternity report with the red certification stamp, the document that proved Richard Calloway was the father he had publicly denied being. On my right were Tom's files, 18 photographs of Richard and Victoria at restaurants at her family's hotel in Boston, walking hand in hand through a parking garage. One photograph showed them at a table with candles and wine glasses. Richard laughing, with his head tilted back, the same laugh he used to save for me. I looked at that photograph for a long time and felt nothing. Not anger, not jealousy, nothing. That absence of feeling told me I was ready. In the center of the table was the digital forensics analysis proving that the vasectomy document had been fabricated using image editing software with metadata showing it was created 72 hours before the anniversary party on a computer registered to Richard's home office. The analyst had highlighted the timestamp in yellow. October 14th, 2:47 in the afternoon. While I was at the florist choosing centerpieces for the party, Richard was at his desk manufacturing the lie that would end our marriage. And beneath everything, a printed spreadsheet of financial transactions showing $87,000 in unexplained transfers over 14 months, including the Cartier bracelet, the diamond earrings, the condominium lease jewelry purchases, and round-trip flights to cities where Victoria's family had properties. Sarah called at 9. She went over the plan one final time. We would not submit evidence in advance. We would allow Richard to speak first, under oath. We would allow him to repeat his claims about the vasectomy, about my infidelity, about his right to the marital estate, and then once his statements were on the record, we would open the envelopes. Let him perjure himself, Sarah said. Once he lies under oath, he does not just lose the divorce. He faces criminal contempt charges. Combined with the document forgery, we are looking at a felony case. The judge will not have discretion. The law will decide for her. I thanked her and hung up. Then I organized the evidence into 3 manila envelopes. Envelope 1, the DNA report. Envelope 2, the forgery proof and the criminal complaint Sarah had already prepared for filing. Envelope 3, the photographs and financial records. I sealed each one and wrote a number on the front with a black pen 123 in the careful block letters I use on architectural drawings. I placed them inside my leather briefcase. The zipper made a sound as I pulled it closed, a small, definitive sound like a door locking. I ran my hand over my belly. The baby shifted. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. 1 DNA report, 18 photographs, 1 forged medical document created 3 days before my anniversary, $2 million in shared marital assets. All of it traced back to one lie spoken in front of 50 people. Tomorrow he would answer for every syllable. The mediation was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on LaSalle Street. Floor-to-ceiling windows, an oval mahogany table, water pitchers with lemon slices, the kind of room where expensive decisions are made quietly. Richard arrived first with his lawyer, a man named Phillips, who wore French cuffs and spoke with the polished confidence of someone who had never lost. Behind them came Eleanor, wearing a charcoal dress and a pearl necklace, her chin lifted at the angle of a woman who believed her son had been wronged. She looked at me when I walked in, and her expression was something between pity and contempt. I sat down across from them, Sarah beside me, my briefcase on the floor by my chair. The mediator, Judge Patricia Hawkins, opened the session with standard language about the purpose of mediation and the goal of reaching an equitable agreement. Then she turned to Richard's side and asked them to present their position. Richard cleared his throat. He adjusted his tie. He took a sip of water and set the glass down with deliberate care, and then he began to perform. I had watched Richard pitch investors for 7 years, and I recognized his technique immediately. The controlled breathing, the measured pauses, the way he held eye contact with Judge Hawkins, as if she were a client he needed to close. His voice cracked at precisely the right moments. His eyes glistened with what appeared to be tears, but what I knew from 7 years of watching him practice presentations in the bathroom mirror was manufactured emotion calibrated for maximum effect. He told Judge Hawkins that he had been devastated to learn of my infidelity, that the pregnancy was proof of my betrayal, that he had undergone a vasectomy years earlier for personal health reasons, and had trusted me completely. He said the word trusted 3 times. He said he was a man who had given everything to his marriage and had been repaid with humiliation. He described how he had supported my career, funded my fertility treatments, built a home for us, only to discover that the child I carried was not his. His lawyer submitted the forged vasectomy document as evidence. Eleanor dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief right on cue. Phillips requested that the marital estate be awarded entirely to Richard as restitution for emotional damages. It was, I had to admit, a flawless performance. Every gesture, every inflection, every tear had been rehearsed until it felt natural. The only flaw was that none of it was true. Judge Hawkins turned to me. "Mrs. Calloway, would you like to respond?" I looked at Richard. He was leaning back in his chair with the posture of a man who had already won. His fingers were laced together on the table. He met my eyes, and there was nothing in his face that resembled the man who had brought me coffee every morning for 7 years. There was only calculation. Yes, I said. I reached into my briefcase and placed the first envelope on the table. This is a certified paternity test conducted via amniocentesis at 12 weeks gestation. The results confirm with 99.99% probability that Richard Calloway is the biological father of the child I am carrying. The room changed, not with a sound, but with an absence of sound. Phillips picked up the report, and I watched the color leave his face in stages like a tide going out. He read it once, then read it again, then turned to look at his client with an expression I recognized from years of watching people discover that a foundation they trusted was built on sand. Richard's hands separated on the table. His left thumb began tapping the wood, a rapid, involuntary rhythm he could not seem to control. Eleanor leaned forward and then stopped as if she had hit a wall she could not see. Judge Hawkins read the document carefully, page by page. Richard said, "That is not possible. I had a vasectomy. I have the records." His voice was still steady. He was still performing. But his thumb kept tapping. I waited. I let the silence hold the room for 5 full seconds. Then I placed the second envelope on the table. This is a digital forensic analysis of the medical document my husband presented at our anniversary party and submitted to this mediation as evidence. The analysis confirms that the document was fabricated using image editing software on a computer registered to Richard Calloway's home office. The file metadata shows it was created on October 14th, 3 days before the party. The clinic listed on the document has confirmed that no vasectomy procedure was ever performed on Richard Calloway. I paused. The room was so still I could hear the ice settling in the water pitcher. My attorney has filed a criminal complaint with the United States Attorney's Office. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, the fabrication and fraudulent use of medical documents constitutes a federal offense, carrying penalties of up to 5 years imprisonment. The sound that came from Richard was not a word. It was more like air escaping from something punctured. His mouth opened and closed, and nothing coherent came out. His forehead was shining with perspiration. The thumb had stopped tapping. His entire hand was shaking now. Phillips put down the forensic report and pushed his chair back from the table by an inch, a small but unmistakable act of separation. He stared at his client with the expression of a man who has just realized he has been standing on the wrong side of a courtroom. Eleanor turned to look at her son, and I saw something move across her face that I had never seen there before. Not anger exactly. Something deeper. Recognition. As if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. She pushed her chair back from the table. Not far. Just a few inches. But the distance was enormous. Richard found his voice. "The clinic," he started. "There was a miscommunication with the clinic. Marcus can explain. I need to call Marcus." His voice was climbing higher with each sentence. Judge Hawkins held up her hand and said, "Mr. Calloway, I advise you not to make further statements at this time." I placed the third envelope on the table. These are photographs documenting my husband's relationship with Victoria Ashford over the past 14 months, including stays at properties owned by the Ashford family. Also included are financial records showing the transfer and dissipation of $87,000 in marital assets, including a condominium lease in Ms. Ashford's name, jewelry purchases, and personal travel. I looked at Judge Hawkins. My husband fabricated evidence of a medical procedure. He never had publicly accused me of infidelity. I never committed, and engineered a divorce filing designed to strip me of all marital assets so that he could pursue a relationship with a woman whose family wealth he intended to access. The pregnancy he called illegitimate is his own child. Richard's forehead was wet. His hands were shaking in a way he could not control, a fine visible tremor that made his fingers tap against the mahogany like a broken metronome. He looked at Phillips. Phillips was already closing his folder. "Mr. Calloway." Phillips said, his voice flat, "Given the nature of these disclosures, I am unable to continue representing you in this matter." He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked out of the conference room without looking back. Eleanor was staring at the photographs spread across the table. One showed Richard and Victoria at a restaurant, his hand on her knee. Another showed them entering a hotel together, Richard carrying an overnight bag I recognized because I had bought it for his birthday 2 years earlier. Eleanor picked up one photograph, held it close to her face, and put it down. She did not speak. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at me. She looked at the table as if she were trying to find a point in the wood grain where reality still made sense. Richard said my name. He said it twice. The second time it cracked in the middle. He said he could explain. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said the photographs were taken out of context. He said Victoria was a business associate. Each lie was weaker than the last, like a building collapsing floor by floor, and by the time he stopped talking, the room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents above us. Eleanor had not moved. She sat in her chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the photographs, and I realized she was not looking at her son anymore. She was looking at the evidence of who her son actually was, and the distance between what she had believed and what she was seeing was a canyon she could not cross. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence was louder than anything Richard had shouted at our anniversary party. Judge Hawkins removed her glasses. She looked at Richard for a long moment, and then she said, "Mr. Calloway, I strongly advise you to obtain new legal counsel immediately. Based on the evidence presented, this mediation will be continued pending further proceedings." She paused and added, "I will also note for the record that the statements made by Mr. Calloway at the beginning of this session are preserved in their entirety." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Everything Richard had said under oath, every claim about the vasectomy, every accusation of my infidelity was now documented perjury. I stood up. I gathered my briefcase. I smoothed my dress, the same gesture I had made on the night of the party, but this time my hands were steady. I walked around the table toward the door. As I passed Richard, he reached for my arm, and I stepped to the side without breaking stride, the way you step around a piece of furniture you have memorized in the dark. I did not look at him. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. The doors opened. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby, and I stood there with my hand on my stomach, and I watched the numbers descend 14, 13, 12, and I did not feel triumph. I did not feel rage. I felt the baby move, and I pressed the spot where the kick had been, and I closed my eyes, and I breathed. The aftermath moved like falling dominoes. Word of the forged vasectomy document and the fraud allegations reached Richard's firm within 48 hours. The managing partner called Richard into his office on a Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, his security badge had been deactivated. The fund's compliance department issued a statement that Richard Calloway's employment had been terminated for cause. In the world of investment management, those 3 words are a career obituary. No reputable fund would touch him. His name, which he had spent 20 years polishing, into something that opened doors and commanded handshakes, became the kind of name that people lowered their voices to say. Victoria's family moved faster than anyone expected. Gerald Ashford had built his hotel empire on a reputation for discretion and integrity, and the prospect of his daughter being publicly linked to a man charged with document forgery and marital fraud was exactly the kind of scandal that could damage booking rates across 23 properties. Tom Kessler told me later that Gerald's personal attorney flew to Chicago and delivered a letter to Victoria in person, hand-carried, no electronic trail. Whatever the letter said, the result was immediate. Victoria was pulled from Richard's orbit with the efficiency of a corporate restructuring. One day she was posting photographs of them together. The next day, her social media accounts were private and Richard's calls went to voicemail. The condominium lease was terminated. The Cartier bracelet was reportedly returned. The fairy tale of marrying into hotel royalty collapsed in less than a week. The formal divorce proceedings were brief. Facing a criminal complaint for forgery and the documented dissipation of $87,000 in marital assets, Richard's new lawyer, a public defender-grade attorney who was the only one willing to take his case, negotiated from a position of complete weakness. The settlement awarded me 90% of the marital estate, including the Lake Forest house, the investment portfolio, and the retirement accounts. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue the maximum criminal penalties for the document fraud, though the complaint remained on file as a permanent record of what he had done. Eleanor called me 3 days after the settlement was finalized. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. She apologized. She said she had not known. She asked if she could return the family ring. She asked if she could meet her grandchild when the time came. I listened to every word. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, "I appreciate you calling, Eleanor. I wish you well." Then I hung up. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with a boundary. Clean and final, like a line drawn on a blueprint. That afternoon, I drove to my obstetrician's office for a routine ultrasound. I lay on the examination table with the cold gel on my belly, and the technician moved the wand, and suddenly the room filled with the sound I had been waiting my entire life to hear. The heartbeat. Rapid, strong, steady, like a tiny drum being played by someone who had never heard of doubt. I lay there and the tears came, and they were not the tears I had cried on Helen's sofa. Those tears had been made of grief and shock and fear. These were different. These were warm. These were the tears of a woman hearing proof that something beautiful had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her. I pressed my hand against the spot on my belly where the sound was loudest, and I whispered, "I have you. I have always had you." 6 months later, I closed on a house in Boulder, Colorado, a small cottage with wood siding and a porch that faced the Flatirons, surrounded by ponderosa pines that smelled like vanilla when the sun hit them in the afternoon. I paid for it with money from the settlement, money that had once been ours and was now mine, and I felt nothing complicated about that. I had earned it. Every injection, every sacrifice, every morning I had woken up early to iron a shirt collar for a man who was planning to discard me. I set up the nursery in the back bedroom. I painted the walls sage green, a color Richard had always dismissed as not sophisticated enough for our Lake Forest house. I painted 3 coats, and when I stepped back to look at the final result, I laughed out loud. It was the first laugh that came from a place of complete ease in 7 years. The sound surprised me. It bounced off the fresh paint and the empty room, and it sounded like someone I used to know. I started a small landscape design consultancy from my kitchen table, taking clients in the Boulder area who wanted gardens that looked like they belonged to the land rather than being imposed upon it. The work came slowly at first and then steadily. I discovered that my reputation had followed me from Chicago, or perhaps it had simply been waiting for me to claim it. I had spent years designing other people's spaces. Now I was designing my own life, and the skills were the same: patience, attention to the soil, understanding that the best results come from working with what is already there rather than forcing something that does not fit. My first major project was a native wildflower meadow for a retired professor near Chautauqua Park. Standing in that field with a site plan rolled under my arm and dirt under my fingernails, I realized I had not felt this kind of professional joy since before the IVF years. The work was mine. The decisions were mine. Nobody was waiting at home to ask why the project was taking so long. I discovered small things about myself that I had forgotten or never known. I preferred chamomile tea in the morning, not the black coffee Richard had insisted we both drink, because it was better for focus. I liked staying up late and sleeping in. I liked eating dinner at 9 instead of 6. I liked silence. Not the tense silence of a house where someone might criticize the way you loaded the dishwasher, but the generous silence of a house where no one needs anything from you except the baby growing inside you. I found a used bookshop on Pearl Street and spent Saturday afternoons reading novels that had nothing to do with landscape architecture or fertility or divorce law. I bought a pair of hiking boots and walked the trails behind my house until my calves ached and the mountains felt like neighbors I was getting to know. Helen flew out once a month. She would sit on my porch with her feet up, and we would drink wine, just 1 glass for me, and talk about nothing and everything, and she never once said, "I told you so." She did not need to. We both knew. There were difficult nights. I will not pretend otherwise. Some nights I woke at 3 in the morning and reached across the bed out of habit and my hand found only cool sheets and empty space. The baby moved inside me during those hours, restless turning, and I would lie there with my palm on my stomach, feeling the kicks and the quiet ache of a life that had been dismantled and rebuilt in a different shape. Not a worse shape, just different. The ache was not for Richard. It was for the years, for the version of myself who had stood in a garden she designed and believed she was home. But the ache always passed by morning, and every morning the mountains were still there outside my window, and the tea was still warm, and the baby was still growing, and the silence in the house was not loneliness. It was space. My space. One morning in Boulder, a Tuesday, I was sitting on the porch with my tea when my laptop chimed. An email from an address I did not recognize. I opened it and read the first 3 lines and knew it was from Richard. He wrote that he was living in a studio apartment in a suburb of Chicago. He wrote that he had taken a position as a junior analyst at a firm no one had heard of. He wrote a long paragraph about regret and loneliness and the mistakes he had made. He asked to meet the baby when it was born. He said he understood if I needed time. He said he was sorry. The email was 600 words long. I read it the way you read a flyer that someone has stuck under your windshield wiper quickly and with no intention of acting on it. I did not feel anger. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel pity. I felt the same thing I feel when I pass a building I used to work in and cannot remember which floor was mine. Distance. Not the kind you create. The kind that simply exists when something no longer matters. I moved my cursor to the delete button. I clicked it. I blocked the address. I closed the laptop and set it on the side table. The whole thing took less than 10 seconds. I did not think about it again until I mentioned it to Helen that evening on the phone, and even then I forgot to finish the story because she started telling me about a new restaurant near her apartment, and that seemed more interesting. I picked up my tea. It was still warm. I held the cup with both hands and looked out at the mountains. The baby shifted, and I felt a kick against my right side, a strong one, and I smiled. A small silver spoon rested against the edge of the cup, and when I lifted it to stir the metal, made a sound against the ceramic. A light, clear, ringing note, almost musical. The same kind of sound a fork makes when it taps a crystal glass at a dinner party. But this was not a party. This was a Tuesday morning on my porch, in my house in the life I had built with my own hands. The mountains did not care about Richard Calloway. The pine trees did not know his name. The baby kicked again, and I pressed my palm against the spot and took a sip of chamomile and let the warmth settle into my chest. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that you deserve more than silence, I would be grateful if you would leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you believe other women need to hear this, please share it with someone you love. Subscribing to this channel is free, and it means these stories keep reaching the people who need them most. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for listening.